Okay, hello everyone. I'm Sohaila Bana with 94803 Emergency Preparedness Alliance. Thank you everyone for coming to learn more about Point Molate. With us tonight we have Sally and Jeff. And Sally, would you like to start, please? Feel free to talk about yourself. I've sent a very brief bio if you want to talk about your activities to let people know you more, please.
Thank you. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm actually the opening act for the main event, which is Jeff. And so I'm going to give some brief comments. My name is Sally Tobin. I'm a member of the Point Molate Alliance, which I'll just call PMA. And I also serve on the board of Citizens for East Shore Parks. So a regional park at Point Molate is PMA's position, which seems to have broad-based support. PMA also advocates for infill development of affordable, moderate, and market rate housing in locations where public transit and infrastructure are readily available. So I'm going to speak briefly, and then I'll be available for any questions at the end of both presentations. So why should Point Molate stay a public space instead of becoming a private upscale development? Basically, three reasons: for justice, for the earth, and to keep Richmond solvent. So Point Molate now belongs to all the residents of Richmond, though many have never visited. It does have scars, but it is not destroyed, and it represents a complete headland, the last one on the bay. Could I have the first slide, please? So this is Point Molate as it exists now. And Jim will use his cursor to show the different features. There are two level drum lots that have been leveled off. Jim's indicating drum lot 2, and then drum lot 1 is at the end of the point, and there's a deep water pier going out into the bay. North of the point is the wine haven area that served as the Center for California winemaking after the 1906 earthquake. And the northern boundary of the property is right about where Jim's cursor is now. And the southern end of the property is a little bit beyond, yeah, there we go, the south end of the drum lot. And then there's a boundary right at the top of the ridge that goes along the ridge just below some of the Chevron storage tanks and then comes down. And there, besides the 270 acres that you can see, there are 142 acres that are submerged. And you can see kind of darker purpley places in the water, and those are the eelgrass beds that you'll hear more about as we go along. So Point Molate is an example of how local decision-making can transform a resilient shoreline into a remote autocentric suburb. So it's a choice either to accelerate climate change or to increase the Earth's resilience. The second slide, please. This is one example of a regional park plan. If Point Molate becomes a regional park, then there would be outreach to the community before anything is finalized. But in this particular drawing, we show soccer fields now located in where drum lot 2 was, and an open area at the end of the point. And the wine haven area is now fully restored. And the rest of the space is open. So let's see. I'd like to contrast that with the third slide, which shows what the development footprint looked like when there were only 1,000 units being proposed. Now there are 1,452 units, and the footprint extends further up the hills above Drumlot 2, as well as between the two main parts, so that it's basically very solid housing in all the areas that are buildable. So there are now sort of fragmented fingers of hiking trails that can come down from the ridge, but they're going to be difficult to get to. The the bulldozing footprint is much larger than the 30% that will ultimately be occupied by the buildings. So there will be an incredible amount of disruption to the natural features out here. The HOA of the development will be in charge of all of the open space, because the entire tract of land will be owned by the development, including the underwater portions. And design features now will minimize recreational use of both the bay and the hillside by Richmond residents. And I won't go into detail now, but if you're interested, please ask me afterwards. So just some selected bad news kinds of facts. There will be bulldozing of over half the site. Hundreds of trees are slated for removal, and this will affect wildlife, birds, and bats. There will be many more culverts.
Going on the ridge on the top, there was a little baby rattlesnake in the middle of the trail.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I usually do, but I was just going to go up.
I'm sorry, could everyone
was
please
it?
mute
Where
yourself?
was
I thought I muted everyone. Sorry about it.
Okay.
Like about the saddle here? Yeah, probably. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, all right. So more culverts will be installed versus the current best practice of daylighting streams. The Ohlone shell mounds and burial sites will be hunted by bulldozer. This area fully qualifies as a suicide subdivision because there's one lane in and one lane out, just like Paradise. And this will increase pollution for Richmond children who already have asthma rates second only to Los Angeles. And this required a statement of overriding considerations by the previous city council. So the fourth slide shows what we really want for Point Molate, and that's recreational opportunities for people in Richmond. Then instead of an exclusionary development, the public should choose park features and priorities in a genuinely open process. So among the menu items are an education center, especially preparation for green jobs, a ranger station, inclusive cultural information about the Ohlone, the Chinese shrimpers, the winemakers, and World War II. The historic area could include space for nonprofits and artists, as well as live work lofts and commercial space. Recreational opportunities could range from water sports to fishing to hiking to mountain bikes to soccer fields, and event space could be powwow grounds, performance spaces, and exhibit spaces. And so now I'm going to stop and introduce Jeff Kilbreth, the excellent number cruncher and risk analyst, who will explain why Richmond would be wise to avoid the ultimate injustice, which is having the city's current residents subsidize an upscale development. Jeff.
Hi, everybody. Well, that was great that everybody got to see the site. You know, and if you haven't gone out there and walked it, you can't, you know, fully appreciate it. And although in some ways aerial pictures are better, so that was great. I mean, I think it really grounds everybody with a common understanding of what are we talking about here. And there's one important point about the aerial views that Sally was just showing, which is that if this site could actually hold 4,000 units of housing, or 5,000 or 3,500. The exact number is not clear, but you know, let's just say 4,000 to pick a number, then the fiscal issues, the fiscal worries, the fiscal risks might not exist. And we would genuinely have an economic option to create a suburban community, if you will, out at the end of Point Molate. There would be no economic reason not to do it, you know. So maybe there would still, of course, be other reasons to argue perhaps against it, but there would be no fiscal or economic reason to not do it. But there's a world of difference between 4,000 units and 1,452. And that's what I'm going to explain to you today. I guess the point about the aerial views that Sally showed is you can see how rugged the terrain is. And you can see, I mean, I think you can see that this is a very hilly, you know, rugged area. And it isn't possible to put 4,000 units of housing out there. In fact, originally people were fantasizing about 4,000, and quickly it dropped to 2,000, and it stayed at 2,000 for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden, when it was ready to go to the city council for approval, it dropped to 1,452. So we're talking about 1,452, but I want to emphasize that part of this is based on the nature of the land. It is just simply not possible to really put a lot of housing out there, but it is possible to put enough housing to cause problems. So here we go. Hang on. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to purely address, I'm not going to talk anything about environmental issues or values or alternatives or anything. I'm just going to talk about the city's general fund and the bonding issues and the potential for this project to damage the public purse, the general fund. Okay. All right. So first of all, let me just say a couple of things about me, just so you know. So I was on the Planning Commission for 2 years, so I'm quite familiar with the process of CEQA review and you know, city approval of real estate development projects. I have a strong background in accounting and an MBA, so I'm quite comfortable playing with numbers and doing what-if analysis with numbers. I'm not sure there's anything else that's important, but I guess let's just say I've read all of the CEQA review documents and I attended all of the Planning Commission meetings and the City Council meetings. So, you know, I do this fiscal analysis in the context of having some experience with the process. And I'm very pro-development. The mayor doesn't think I am, but I am. You know, what I'm not interested in doing is having a largely working class town with a very difficult, constant, difficult budget situation, subsidizing, you know, the creation of Tiburon East. I'm not interested in that. Okay, so, all right, so first of all, it's an extremely unusual development project. I mean, literally 1 in 1,000. Because the property insurance industry and the banking industry won't provide insurance or mortgages without a dedicated 24/7 fire station, you know, we got a really different situation here. We got 1,452 units of housing trying to support a 24/7 fire station. Doesn't work. Secondly, just, I guess maybe another way of putting it is the costs involved with this project for the city's general fund are very large. $6 million a year for a fire station. Normally, a development has no significant costs for the general fund. It's the, if it goes badly, the only thing that happens is the city tax base doesn't increase as much as people had hoped. That's it, but there's no downside, it's just we didn't get the upside we hoped for. This is a completely different situation because the fire and police station costs $6 million a year from day one, from the time when the first units are sold. Richmond's budget is not like San Francisco or Tiburon's. We do not have a surplus. We do not have a gold-plated balance sheet. We are constantly struggling to make this budget balance and to be able to spend money on the things we need to spend money on. We cannot afford to take the same kind of risks that, a San Francisco could afford to take. And finally, this project requires at least a minimum of $300 million in infrastructure. And some of this work is very complicated. The sewage system and getting sewage from Point Molate through Point Richmond to the existing sewage treatment plant is fraught with risk and complications. So it might end up costing more than $300 million. Well, think about it. That works out to over $200,000 per housing unit. I don't think so. I mean, think about it. You're selling properties, you're selling condos in Point Molate with a $200,000 extra mortgage on them, and we'll get into this a little more later, but you can imagine it really doesn't, it's really risky, is the point. Okay, so a few more key background points. So I've already talked about the first one. Point Molate is a challenging site to develop. The buildable land is limited. Originally 4,000 homes, and they ended up settling on 1,452 because they couldn't really fit more in. The current Richmond Shoreline resale market and new construction market as well for condos and townhomes is is basically $450 a square foot. What does that mean? That means there's a range of 400 to 500. Really nice places go for 500 a square foot, but very little goes for more than 500 a square foot. And it's always been obvious, when you think about it, that if you start year one with a police and fire cost of $6.5 million, and it takes 15 years to sell all the units, you're gonna have a lot of losses while you build out the project. Okay, none of that was admitted. None of that was discussed. None of that was, kind of dealt with early in the process. So these build out period losses were finally acknowledged by the developer and our consultants who are paid for by the developers at the last minute. And when they did that, they came up with a proposal, which was, they called it a concession. I thought that was an interesting term. And the concession was to offer to cover them until, build out was complete. And it was a tax on the developers, on SunCal, and they could pass it on to somebody else if they sold things to somebody else, development parcels. But the point was that until everything was built, there would be an obligation for the developers who own the property or individual parcels on the property to pay a tax, and that this would cover the losses during the build-out period. I mean, but literally, this only happened in the week or two before the CFD got evaluated, which is, basically shocking. Okay, so why did the city council vote no on the CFD? Let's get to the heart of it, and then I'll give you the details of the general fund picture in particular. The city's consultant confirmed that 1,452 homes can't repay $292 million in CFD bond principal at 5 or 6 or 7% interest. Interest rates are going up now, right? 30-year mortgages are up a point since the beginning of the Ukraine war. There's no reason to think that they're going to get bonds for less than 5%. And depending on when they actually get around to issuing them, it could be 6 or 7%. So basically, you know, it just doesn't work. And everybody was shocked that the ask was for $292 million. I mean, it's just a lot of money. It's $200,000 per housing unit. And the important point about it is state law does not allow CFDs to charge a tax greater that will make the residents property taxes go beyond 2%. So right now, the regular county tax and the Richmond and county add-on supplemental taxes, you know, both ad valorem and fixed, all of those taxes together are basically 1.6%. So there's only 0.4% left. And think about it. So if that 0.4% equals $267 a month on an $800,000 condo. I mean, trust me on that. So that is simply not enough money for anybody to expect that you know, 292 million is going to be paid off in 35 years. So we said, oh, that doesn't sound possible. And the city's bond consultant, who was the consultant for the CFD review, said, yeah, no way. It's not going to happen. So there we were, presented with the developer asking for something that was impossible. It was illegal, wasn't going to happen. And guess what? The bond issuers were going to see it in a heartbeat. So they were never going to give 292 million. So they were asking the City Council of Richmond to approve something that couldn't happen, wouldn't happen, and would make the housing units uncompetitive in the marketplace. You know, it was really kind of extraordinary. Now I'm going to switch gears and talk about the general fund, which is a completely separate discussion. Assuming a positive general fund outcome basically requires you to believe that home appreciation over 30, 40, 50 years is going to exceed police and fire cost increases by at least 2 percentage points. Meaning that if police and fire costs go up 3% on average for 30 years, a home appreciation at Point Molate for condos in 5-story buildings are going to go up 5% a year for 30 years. That sounds like a gamble to me. Who knows? But at any rate, there were no protections, and there was, I mean, you know, there was no reason to be confident about that. But it, you know, what can you say? You know, nobody has a crystal ball and nobody has perfect wisdom about real estate appreciation. What we can say, though, is that condos and townhomes in Marina Bay and Point Richmond, which are, you know, kind of on some level the best comparisons we've got, have averaged 3% over the last 20 years. Okay, that's a fact. All right, because they went up and then the 2008 housing crisis happened and they went down and then they've come back up. And it's not like single family homes. Single family homes are much more, I don't know, what do you want to call it? They're more valuable, and they have higher appreciation rates than condos and townhomes. So switching gears to what SunCal proposed in response to this, they proposed a special fiscal impact task. I mean, remember, we'd gone for 2 years with them saying there was no problem. The city was going to make a lot of money and there were no problems. Well, in fact, there are problems, and they admitted it finally, but only like 3 weeks ago. And when they admitted it, they said, okay, we'll voluntarily agree to a special fiscal impact tax on undeveloped land And that will cover all the shortfalls until all the units are sold. Great, cool, okay. So they admitted that there would be $50 to $70 million in losses in the build out period. And they said they would cover it. But their proposal for coverage has no guarantees. If they declare bankruptcy, the city would have to foreclose on the development because there's no guarantee. It would be an agreement by Winehaven LLC that has no assets. So when they go bankrupt, there's nothing to go after. Nothing. Now, if it had been SunCal, or if it had been SunCal with a bond or money in escrow, it might have been a different discussion, but it wasn't. It was Winehaven LLC and no guarantees and no backing up of the commitment. Okay, so you can see why everything about the special impact tax is a problem, because first of all, it doesn't cover the significant possible losses after build out. And that goes back to the previous discussion about it only works if home appreciation is greater than police and fire cost inflation. If they're the same, if Point Molate didn't do any better than Point Richmond and Marina Bay, and appreciation was 3% a year, and police and fire was 3% a year, then there are significant losses after build out. And SunCal, didn't have anything to say about that possibility. Okay, and then finally, there were some non-compliance issues, which I'm not privy to, I don't know about, and I'm not the right person to talk about it with. But if you were to interview the city attorney, or for that matter, some of the city council people, you would find out that there were also, reasons to be unhappy with SunCal that existed independent of this financial issue of fiscal risk or fiscal impact to the general fund. Okay, now I don't know if this is how important all of this is, but I gotta say, the current market for the current demand for real estate and the current changes in construction costs are pretty significant. I mean, people should not think that the world is the same now as it was 3 years ago. And we know this from two major projects for the Richmond Shoreline, which I know a lot about because I was on the Planning Commission when they were approved or started to be considered. Terminal 1, which has got the best view of all possible views in the entire city of Richmond. Terminal 1, which is right next to Miller Knox Park, originally wanted to do 295 condos and a handful of single family homes. And now they're saying they can't make it work and they don't trust it. So they want to do 97 single family homes, 60 duplexes, and a bunch of ADUs. And similarly, the Quarry project at Canal and Seacliff Drive, originally for 200 condos and now 100 single family homes. Why are they doing this? They're doing it for two reasons. One is because the construction costs involving things with steel and concrete are going up twice as fast as the construction costs for things that use, just lumber and sheetrock, basically. So it's the difference between 2-story buildings and 5-story buildings. And similarly, or separately, maybe, the market demand has always been stronger for single family homes and duplexes, townhomes, than for condos. And everything about the pandemic has increased that, essentially. Okay, so, but then you get to the issue of, well, maybe Point Molate could do that too. But the answer to that is back to those aerial photos. Point Molate can't do that. Point Molate could, at best, get 200 single family homes, and I don't even think that many, where 1,160 condos and rental units are planned for. It just doesn't fit, you know? So that's a problem. Okay, so I'm going to do this one quickly and hope you just get the general idea. The general fund's risks are very specific, and there's a set of them, all right? If absorption rate, if the units get sold in 7 years, 15 years, or 30 years, it makes a material difference to the city because it changes the property tax flow, right? Makes sense. Initial selling prices, how much they sell for, of course affects the property tax revenue, and the annual inflation rate in home prices affects the property tax rate. So the first 2 points are about essentially property taxes, regular property taxes. How quickly do we get them, and how much do we get when we get them? Then there's turnover. How often do these units turn over? Because we get property transfer taxes every time somebody sells a unit. Well, there's a big difference. It's really quite significant between whether units turn over, 8% of the units turn over in a year, and 15% of the units turn over in a year. Big difference, because the transfer taxes are quite significant. Inflation rate in police and fire costs, we've talked about that, you know, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, we don't know. But we know that the police and fire unions are very good at fighting for their ability to maintain their standard of living and their position in the face of inflation, et cetera. Household taxable purchases made in Richmond for sales tax. Okay. You know, I mean, we'll get to this later. I'll mention it later, but just to make the point come alive, SunCal said that the residents of Point Molate would spend $18,000 a year on taxable purchases. I'm not talking about, you know, like, you know, vegetables that don't get taxed, you know, I'm talking about taxable groceries. But that includes, of course, online shopping, Amazon. But it doesn't include, and it includes restaurants, you know, but it doesn't include, you know, produce and things like that. Well, I don't know about you, but I actually work hard to spend as much of my, you know, my consuming dollar as possible in Richmond, because that's who I am. I am so not close to $18,000. It's ridiculous. Okay, you get my point. So everybody can think about that at a personal level. I shop at Safeway next to Del Norte. I shop at Home Depot. I shop in Solano Avenue. I shop in Berkeley. I do not shop as much as I wish I could in Richmond, and I don't go to Costco. So there you go. That's just me. Okay, the Community Finance District, actually, even if it was a more reasonable number, even if it was 150 million instead of 292, the Community Finance District, under various scenarios, still might end up failing to meet its bond payments because it's all, you know, really a stretch. And if that happened, the city of Richmond would be responsible for negotiating resolution. And this is like, you know, $1 million a year of just, you know, really unpleasant cost for lawyers, for, you know, all finance people, for, you know, all manner of things. But that was what the consultants, our city consultants, have told us to expect in the case of a CFD bankruptcy. The skyrocketing costs of steel and cement, simply put, disadvantage large buildings. They're going to disadvantage them in many ways, and there's just risk. All I'm talking about here is risk. And finally, they were counting on a commercial development at Point Molate that was, you know, going to be worth $150 million of assessed value. Well, I don't know about you, but I am just stunned by the amount of office space that is currently vacant. And I read the other day that San Francisco Bay Area has the highest vacancy rate in the country. And having been in the software business in my working career, I can just tell you, software companies are not going to locate at Point Molate. So I don't know who they think would purchase or rent that much commercial office space out at Point Molate, but I can assure you that it's a risk. So those are just elements of risk, and you have to decide what to do about elements of risk. So SunCal's assumptions in 2020 were that the average 1,500 square foot condo would sell for $1.3 million. A lot of money. Sounds like a San Francisco condo to me. Sounds like one of a very small number of high-end, best-in-class condos in Tiburon. Not the average condo in Tiburon, but only the very best condos in Tiburon. I mean, I don't know, where'd they get that? I mean, you want to bet the city on that? I don't. At any rate, they finally admitted last month that that was ridiculous, or they didn't call it ridiculous. They called it, like, well, maybe that's not right, but I mean, really, that was extraordinary. That was like a 40% overstatement of the current market value of a condo. I mean, really, it was not confidence building, let's say. And then there are 5 things that they assumed that are still not admitted or resolved, but are still true. And that if you are a city council person trying to make sense of the thing, or if you're a citizen like all of us here on this call, you should be concerned about. So first of all, their whole assumption was based on, don't worry about timing. In other words, timing doesn't matter. Inflation in costs will be the same as inflation in revenues. So just figure out what it would all be at the prices you think are right now, and the costs that would be right now, and then declare success if you can show it working. Well, it turns out that, actually doing a 50-year cash flow, which is what I did, was very illuminating. And it's no surprise, but if you start with a $6.5 million police and fire cost, and you start with a $50,000 property tax revenue stream, and you put on the same inflation, rate, the $50,000 one never catches up, if you know what I mean, even though you're, of course, adding more units to it. They also assumed, as I said before, that sales tax would be based on household spending $18,000 a year in taxable purchases in Richmond. They also assumed that unit turnover would be 15.5% per year. Wow. I always thought the standard number in the real estate industry was 8%. Now, I believe it could be 10, but I mean, Lord have mercy, it's not. I don't think it's 15.5. The utility taxes were based on taking the entire city utility taxes and dividing the city households by it, and they came up with a number. But it turns out, as many of you may know, that Chevron and other commercial and industrial companies pay 2/3 of our utility tax revenue. So really, they overstated that by a factor of 3. And then finally, they were counting on 150 million in assessed value on office space, at a place where there's not much reason to be confident that you could get $150 million of office space. So just so you know, the city attorney and the city's CFD consultant are fully aware of the legitimacy of these questions, and the fact that SunCal hasn't formally acknowledged them, or that some of our other politicians have not either, is really all I can say is ask the city attorney and the city's CFD consultant if these things aren't concerning. They are. Okay, so as some of you may know, as I said a minute ago, so I actually did a 50-year cash flow spreadsheet, and these were the assumptions I used. And, I've adjusted them a lot, over the last month as I hear people, saying things that, and where I thought, and I've changed a lot of things up to make the picture more positive, because I don't want to overstate this. I don't want to say that it's, a $300 million disaster when it's actually only a $150 million disaster. So this is the picture of the $150 million disaster, but I can't make it any better than this. And these are the assumptions I used.
I'm sorry for interruption, Jeff, but the meeting's usually for an hour, and I hope you allow at least 10 minutes for questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay, I think I think this is the second to last slide.
Okay, thank you very much. Just wanted to let you know some people may have questions.
Yeah, sure. I know, of course. All right, so you can see that, what we're assuming 15 years to sell 1,452 units. We're assuming, 1.5 million for the single family homes and 800,000 for the condos and townhomes, and 435 for the rental units. 3% inflation for both home prices and the police and fire cost. 10% turnover on units sold. Taxable purchases of 7.2 thousand a year, utility taxes done right, and no commercial development because it's too speculative. In the best case scenario, SunCal's proposal would cover the losses, the $52 million in my spreadsheet over 13 years. But after year 13, when SunCal would no longer pay anything, we would have losses continuing from year 14 through year 50, and that would be 141 million. We never reach break even. The closest we would ever come would be a negative $380,000 in year 15. And in the two worst cases for our general fund, SunCal actually pays the shortfalls during the build-out period, but the project isn't, a super big hit, and it takes 20 years to build and absorb so many units, and prices only go up 2% a year. Those kind of assumptions, which are admittedly worst case. But if those things happen, then Richmond loses $300 million, roughly. The other worst case scenario is that SunCal's shell company, Winehaven LLC, declares bankruptcy in the middle of construction when only 500 or 1,000 units have been built, and the city loses even more than 300 million. And SunCal has quite a significant history of this game, of getting into deals and then getting out of the deals by declaring bankruptcy through a shell company. So there is no protection at all for the city in these worst case scenarios. And as I said before, the protection for the absolutely known $50 to $70 million losses in the first 15 years is not a guarantee, because they wouldn't put any money behind it. They wouldn't bond it. They wouldn't put it in escrow. They wouldn't, they wouldn't do anything that would make it a true guarantee. And that's what our CFD consultant told us, that it was not a guarantee. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm having difficulty with, I only see your screen, so I don't know if there are any raised hands or not yet. So I ask my couple of questions first before we get other questions. So, Tom Butt called this the nuclear option. I wonder if there were alternatives to the nuclear option, like negotiating with, excuse my ignorance. So I really don't know if there was an option to negotiate with SunCal, hold them responsible rather than the shell company. Could the contract have had, I don't know, addendums, changes, anything that make it work? Also, when you talk about let's take care of this first.
I can only say that that the city attorney and the consultant, the CFD consultant, the guy who was hired specifically to facilitate Richmond adopting a community finance district, that those are the two people who were in the position to negotiate with SunCal. That what I'm representing is public concern, PMA concern, and I can say that I have shared all of my information with some city council members. And the city council members fully understand these issues and risks, or at least, you know, some of them do. And it was up to the city attorney and the CFD consultant to broker a solution. And what the CFD consultant said was, here's the solution they propose, but it is no guarantee. What can I say? You know, he didn't say that it was no guarantee, like he thought that was a good thing. And it was his job to have talked to them about strengthening it, you know? So could we still go back to them and say to them, come on, guys, you know, if you want to do this, you need to really give us more protection.
Okay.
I hope they do that. I mean, let's put it this way. If they would guarantee this, you know, I'd be a much happier person.
Thank you. So one thing has been confusing to me, and I assume has been confusing to other people too, is mixing two issues. One, the environmental issue. All of us would like to have, you know, park in Point Molate, at least a big portion of it, and have public access to it and everything. The other issue is the business calculations and was it a good deal for the city or not? And often these two are mixed, so it's confusing whether it's a delaying tactic to, you know, keep it from being built or it's an actual issue. For example, you talk about offices space. I cannot imagine offices, but it'd be a very nice place for mixed use, like restaurants, boutiques, shops. There is no shopping place around here, like we have to go to Walnut Creek or San Francisco. It would have, you know, made a very nice promenade with access to the water, public access, shops, restaurants, everything. Has that been considered? I mean, the mixed zone you're talking about?
I think that when their proposal for the commercial development piece, which I referred to a couple of times as the $150 million of assessed value for, you know, shall we say, like turning 20% of it into a commercial development. But 80% of that was their proposal, was 80% was for office space. And I gotta say, I live in Point Richmond, and every day of my life, when I walk down to a corner store or to the barber shop in Point Richmond, I just shake my head in incredulity at how few people go to the restaurants and how little shopping there is in Point Richmond, which is the center of a larger community, you know? So the idea that, you know, going way out the hell to the end of Point Molate is going to be the perfect place for, you know, retail shops and, you know, I mean, it's possible, but do you want to bet the general fund on it? And well, that's my problem. You know, a developer could take that gamble, but for the city of Richmond to expose itself to that gamble, it doesn't make sense to me. And based on our experience on the Richmond shoreline, in Point Richmond and in Marina Bay, I gotta say, there's so much good shopping so close to Richmond. I mean, I go to Solano Avenue a lot.
I'm sorry, let's not make it personal about our personal choices. My question, because we have raised hands, if you don't mind, let's get those. I have more questions for you, but let's come to them after we answer other questions. Pam, please.
Just really briefly, I have been a unincorporated Richmond resident for 27 years. And before that, I lived in Tiburon. And my concern right now, believing that these financial reporting is correct, that the general fund is going to be in big trouble without a guaranteed repayment of these costs, assuming that that's 100% true. The thing that happened in Tiburon is that the people who made the decision, the mayor, the council member, whoever those people were more or less paid off by the developers and took all of the center of Tiburon, which was a beautiful open marshland, which was like a huge open park, and people would walk through it, and it wasn't officially a park, but it was used that way. And now it's just a bunch of like shingled condos. It's really stuffed. And so my concern is that even if all these numbers make sense, even if this presentation is completely accurate, that the people that are in charge of making the decision will get their payoff, and they'll make that decision, and then Richmond will be left hanging the bag. Is there any way to prevent that from happening? Cause like some kind of fear of God in these people, that they will be held responsible and they can't just leave town with the money?
Well, I mean, I understand your shall we say, cynicism, but I guess what I want to say is that in the same way that by a 4-3 vote, the prior city council approved the development project, despite the concerns, despite the environmental issues, despite all things. This city council said the CFD was dangerous because the fiscal impact on the general fund had the negative impact on the general fund was not satisfactorily proven to be not a risk, and the bond thing was crazy. So they have effectively shut down this project. Now, that doesn't mean that the project couldn't be reactivated. They could agree to, like open it up again, but as of right now, they killed the project.
Thank you, Serge. And after that, I hope Sally talks about the future of Point Molate and what the hope about it is. Go ahead, Serge. Thank you.
Yeah, so I put this in the chat bar also. So those of us on this forum, we've been really lucky to get two very diametrically opposing views of reality or future realities for the site, because Tom presented us a couple of days ago a very different vision. And it looks like on the basis of past dealings, the current legal trajectory is either for SunCal to proceed or for SunCal to sue the city for breach of contract or some equivalent thereof. So can you project a scenario how the city can get out of its apparent contractual obligations to the developers who are, according to Tom, they're out of pocket approximately 20 million and aren't gonna go retreat quietly into the night?
I'm no expert. My brother's a lawyer. I have some, exposure to legal lawyer people and the way they think. But I'm not a lawyer. I'm a business guy, so I can't say for sure. But I do believe that we already know what the casino developers require. They've already said they would be happy with 22.5 million, and that would take care of all of their costs in developing a proposal for the casino and some profit. So they've already told us what they need to be to go away happy, 22.5 million. And we already know that the city of Richmond would love to get 22.5 million. So that's 45. And that is the current deal that's sort of on the table with those guys. Now, as for what SunCal ought to get to go away, I think that's a pretty interesting question. SunCal has been guilty of providing really, what do you want to call it? Really inaccurate and misleading financial numbers from day one. And they have not responded to the real questions that people had about risk. And so, my personal feeling is they shouldn't get a damn thing. And I'm not sure that they need to be given a damn thing. But in the interests of getting on with life, I mean, maybe they should get something. And they could get 5 million and they would have all their costs recovered. And so there we are, $50 million. So the question becomes, how do we get $50 million? And the answer to that is clear. There are a lot of people, a lot of foundations, a lot of trusts, a lot of, and the East Bay Regional Parks to kind of lead the charge and coordinate the efforts. There is a way to raise $50 million to get everybody happy, and another $50 million to build a world-class park, and no fire station needed. So there, that's my reaction. That Mayor Butts, kind of fear-mongering about, hundreds of millions of, legal expenses. I think it's really, I think it's actually quite dishonest and misleading. I think he's very, very vested in this project, and that he's never thought.
Jeff, may I ask you to please just stay on your own position, because
Okay.
Mayor Bott is not here to
Yeah.
defend himself or say anything. Please just refrain
Okay.
from, accusing other people of anything. Just state your position and trust the intelligence of the people who are here, who will deduce the conclusions for themselves. Thank you very much. So you talked about East Bay Regional Park Districts. Has anybody talked to them? Do they have the money? Do they have the interest to take action? What is the plan? And what is your hope for you and Sally, if you could answer it, please, for the future of Point Molate?
You want to take it, Sally?
Okay. Let me just mention a couple of aspects. I mean, I already sort of in my introduction talked about what my hopes are for Point Molate, and that is a world-class regional park. The East Bay Regional Park District did write a letter as part of the documentation for Point Molate, and they stated that they were not interested in handling the shreds of land that were left after building such a large development. So they were concerned about the environmental damage and the fact that there wasn't much contiguous land left after everything was bulldozed, but they were also concerned about the wildlife urban interface, because that's a place of increased fire danger, because that's where human dwellings come into contact with wildlands. And because of the fingers of the development going up the hill, the WUI interface was much longer than it would have been otherwise. And so they felt that they could not opt in to being interested in the park after the development was built. But, and I can't speak for them or talk about negotiations, but I do understand that there is some interest there, and that is certainly one aspect of talks and negotiations that are going on. And the other thing I'd like to mention before we come to the end of the session is that there will be tours of Point Molate on Earth Day, which is Saturday, April 23rd. Jim Hansen and I will be leading walking tours out of the beach park. And there will be a number of environmental organizations there, and everybody is invited.
Okay, thank you very much. We heard actually East Bay Regional Parks wouldn't mind managing the park if it turns into a park, but they don't have the interest or the money to purchase the land or pay anything for it. Is that true, or do you know anything about it?
I think it's public knowledge that East Bay Regional Park District set aside $4.7 million to start establishing a park at Point Molate, but they did not spend that money after the development plans were published. And I don't know their particular situation, but it's possible that they could remobilize that money and use it for that purpose. So I mean, I can't speak for them, but I think they're very interested.
But I can add one thing. I mean, they've written a letter recently to the city attorney saying that if Richmond's negotiations and deliberations with SunCal do not, I believe the right way to characterize it, I haven't read it, this is secondhand, but I believe that the way to characterize it is that they are very interested in the possibility of turning it into a park, and that's that takes a lot more than 4.7 million, and that they are interested and they are confident that they could raise funds. I'm not sure they've figured out a whole plan or know that they need 100 million or 80 million or exactly how many million, but they certainly understand that that the city of Richmond would need to settle the lawsuits and develop the park, right? Actually, make it the park, and that's a lot of money. But on the other hand, when you think about it, there's a lot of people who believe in parks and believe in open space, and getting $100 million for the last ridge to shoreline park on San Francisco Bay, is really doable. I mean, with the right effort, right? I guess and they are expressing confidence about this.
So the Point Molate is now going back for $400 to the original developer and the tribe. So what's going to happen next?
I think the important point to realize in terms of not getting confused by that is the city of Richmond got a bunch of time to find a developer, make a deal and succeed in turning it into a development or to do whatever it was going to do. And the Richmond picked SunCal, and here we are. The fact that it is technically on May 21st, the tribe and Levine get to buy it for $400. I mean, get to buy effectively the rights to market it. That's what it is. It's the rights to market it, and they will have the same issues if they do that. They would have to come up with a proposal. They'd have to figure out what they want to build out there, and they would have to go through the planning commission. They probably wouldn't have to go through the CEQA process. I hope not. But they would have to actually go through the whole process. And I don't think Richmond will again make the mistake of not looking at the numbers, and all of that. And, if their proposal was 200 units, and that would be great because 200 units don't require a dedicated fire station, we might have something. But I think what's really the case is they just want their 22.5 million. And I think we're going to figure this. I think it can be figured out. But looking at that prospect, they could either encourage everybody to take one more year and see if they can work it out, right? In other words, not exercise their option, but prefer that Richmond and SunCal keep working at it.
Thank
Or,
you very much.
or that Richmond, come up with a, Richmond is given more time to find a new partner, like maybe East Bay Regional Parks.
So I have a question for Sally. Assuming everything that was presented here in terms of the numbers were correct, and somehow somebody comes along with the numbers that are acceptable and actually makes profit for the city, would that project be acceptable to you, Sally?
You mean another development project?
Right, right. I'm trying to find out what the issue is. Things are so tangled up in the city. I'm trying to have a clear understanding, hopefully myself and the audience here, what the main issues are and try to separate them.
Okay, so my personal opinion is that that's an inappropriate place to have a development. And, for the reasons that I mentioned, because the development has to be so massive because there's no infrastructure. So you have to pay for all of that infrastructure, and the development has to be massive, and that is going to destroy the ecosystem out at Point Molate, which is, I think, really a precious thing. I mean, how can students and youth in Richmond learn to respect the earth if they never get a chance to see how it works?
How about development being further away from the shore on the hills?
The hills are too steep. Even with the current plan of 1,452 units, the all of the lower hills and going up in fingers toward the upper hills, everything is covered until it gets so steep that it is not buildable. And there are plans to grade more than 50% of the site, and they're going to be building retaining walls and destroying some of the rare plant communities out there in order to build what they've got out there now. So I think it's just really a case of trying to fit Cinderella's sister's feet into the glass slipper. I think, you can push and shove all you want, but I think it's really not going to work. And I can't see how it's going to pencil out.
Okay. The other question is, you have a beautiful image of kayak of a mother and child probably. And then you talked about eelgrass. Is that picture taken in that area? Do we have sand beach in Point Molate? Is that actually doable there?
Yes, that is doable there. That particular picture was taken at Point Pinole, but it was part of a Richmond program. And there is a kayak launch at Point Molate at the beach park. It's kind of eroded, unfortunately, from the storm surge and the higher tides, and it needs to be rebuilt. And I'm assuming that there just isn't the budget to do that. But I've kayaked out of Point Molate many times. It's a great place to kayak out of and into, as long as you're really careful to avoid injuring the eelgrass, because that's such a nursery for embryonic crabs and other marine life.
Okay, because I've been there a couple of times and I never saw any sand beach. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, it's a little bit gravelly, but it's kind of a coarse sand.
Okay.
Except if the tide is out. If the tide is out, then it's sucky mud, and you better not get caught out there. You'll lose your shoes.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for coming. We are over 1 hour. I really appreciate your time, your presentation. And our hope is to get issues cleared, go beyond personal choices, present the facts to our residents, and allow them think for themselves and see what's good. And, getting environmentalist issues. We are all pro-environment. We all want to park over there. It's our precious natural resource. We want it there. But does development make sense? Somehow it's tangled up with the environmental issue. So I hope we clarified it a little tonight. To me, still there are many questions. So hopefully as we move on, we'll see what happens. Thank you very much again. And thank you for all the community members being with us tonight. And I will send the video link to you soon. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting.
Of course.